Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. We're continuing our study of the book of Psalms by looking at Psalm 1 and understanding Hebrew poetry through this first psalm, which is a master class for us in understanding Hebrew poetry. We talked about faceting and shading, and there are those are different, but they're closely related, and we see them both in Psalm 1. So let's read Psalm 1. How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree firmly planted by streams of water, which yields fruit in its season. Its leaf does not wither, and in whatever he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so. They're like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. There's just so many things that we failed to mention. I said we could talk about each of these forever, but two glaring comparisons, contrasts that I failed to mention. Verse 1, and this psalm is in two verses, really. Verses 1 through 3 is the first stanza. Verses 4 through 6 is the second stanza. The first stanza ends with the word prospers, and the second stanza ends with the word perish. Well, there you go. You also have a collection, a group. Verse 1 talks about sinners collectively, and verse 5 talks about the assembly of the righteous. So we have both groups. We want to talk about shading today and faceting. And I want to look at verse 2. We can look at verse 1 as well in terms of shading because we have, somebody pursuing a path. And then we have the different levels of pursuit of that path, walking, standing, sitting. But I wanted to focus on verse 2 in terms of shading. And it's taking joy, it's finding goodness in the Word of God. And he uses two different words um, that two different words that describe what we do when we come to the text. And it's such an introduction to Psalm 119. So let's look at verse 2. His delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. So we have an internal rhyme in this one line, and it's the word law, which is repeated twice. It's also the section, the line in which God's name, Yahweh, appears, and it appears at the dead center of this line. So if there's a righteous person and we're going to connect with God, Yahweh's in the middle. Yahweh's in the middle. And at the beginning of the line, we have delight in the law. We have law on either side. Yahweh in the middle, law, law. And then we have something that we take from the law or that we bring to the law, that we experience with the law through the law. And at the beginning of the line, we have delight. And at the end of the line, we have meditation. We talked about how the whole book of Psalms begins in wisdom and ends in joy, in the ecstatic joy of the word, of our relationship with God. But in this verse, when we bring ourselves to God, we bring ourselves to his law, or we don't bring ourselves to him at all. So we start with God's words which were spoken and then written down, the text that we have. This is how we experience God. And the first part of our experience is delight, and then meditation. And so our initial response is just joy, and it is. I mean, it is. Um, how can you read those beautiful words, read those wonderful, engaging stories, and not feel joy? Everyone takes joy at beautiful things, at stories that engage, even if those stories teach us a lesson through hardship and not just pleasant things. We take joy in them because we experience them. We bring joy to the text. We bring joy to the text, and then once we get into the text, we think. We spend time. There's the element of time. So these are shades of our response to the text, and it's our response, but it's the different. It's the one side of the coin and the other side of the coin. You know, so it's the different shades of it. Now, when he talks about in verse 3, the image of the tree, that's straight up faceting. So he's like a tree. How is he like a tree? Well, in a variety of ways. A tree firmly planted by streams of water. How is he like that? Well, he's like that in that he bears fruit in its season. So there's the seasons of life aspect of it, and there's bearing fruit and bearing fruit at the right time aspect of it, and then there's the leaf doesn't wither because we're by the rivers of water. There's the fact that there's the health throughout all the seasons, despite the fact that the seasons change. The tree continues to be healthy in itself, and whatever he does, he prospers. The outcome is always going to be the positive outcome. The bearing of fruit, which is going to bring sustenance, which is going to bring prosperity. That's a given. And so it's like he's taking the tree as an image, but we're looking at every aspect of the tree. We're talking about the roots. We're talking about the change of seasons. We're talking about the leaf. We're talking about the fruit. We're talking about every aspect of being a healthy tree with a constant water source. Um, and so that's the faceting out. And again, the faceting out, the rhyme itself is the lesson. It's the lesson. Just think about we've got two verses, and in the second verse, we have learned what we need to know about our relationship with God and His Word. And in the third verse, we learn what we need to know about the way righteousness establishes our lives. Um, it's amazing what God does with words. Just a few words, a few strokes of the brush on the page, and He communicates. The word is the miracle of God. I'd rather have this. Rather have this than have seen the Hebrews cross the Red Sea on dry land. I would rather have this than see Jesus walk on the water because I get to do both right here, plus everything else that's here. This is the miracle of God. I don't want any of us to ever forget that. We're going to have a couple more sessions. Thank you for bearing with me and while I geek out about Hebrew poetry in Psalm 1. We'll pick up there next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes.